Pilot refuses to fly with black woman on board, gets reassigned. When her father calls the board, there are moments that shift our lives forever, moments we never see coming, when fate steps in to test who we really are. On a cool morning at John F. Kennedy International Airport, a routine flight to Los Angeles became the epicenter of a storm of prejudice, power, and unstoppable courage. A seasoned Delta Airlines pilot locked eyes with a young black woman in first class and decided he wouldn't fly unless she was removed. In that single, charged confrontation, destinies collided. What happened next unleashed a chain reaction of anger, corporate leverage, and raw determination that would leave everyone changed forever. Emma Johnson was not one to shy away from challenges. At 29, she had already established herself as a rising star in the tech world, recognized for her brilliance in software design and coding. After graduating summa cum laude from Howard University, Emma launched her own startup focused on advanced data encryption. It caught the eye of major investors, even garnering an award at a national cybersecurity conference. Confident, elegant, and articulate, Emma had learned to navigate spaces where she sometimes felt like an outsider. She wore her natural hair in twists, refused to code switch her voice to soothe biases, and carried herself with a quiet but unshakable determination. Her flight was booked on Delta Airlines, Flight 453, from JFK to Los Angeles International. She had an important conference scheduled in Los Angeles with top venture capitalists. This trip, in many ways, would steer the future of her company. She had poured her savings into developing a new data security software that, if it gained traction, might revolutionize how small businesses protected client information. Emma was on the cusp of a major breakthrough, and her father, Frederick Johnson, a well-known civil rights lawyer, had been cheering for her every step of the way. The night before her flight, Emma packed her suitcase methodically. As her cat, Smokey, meowed in protest at the half-open suitcases, she scrolled through her emails on her laptop. The final confirmations for her meetings came in. Prominent investors, including some from the West Coast tech scene, looked forward to her presentations. She planned to stay in Los Angeles for a week, mixing business with the possibility of a quick visit to Universal Studios or a walk along the Pacific shore. Busy as she was, Emma always made time for small joys. Her father had offered to drive her to the airport. Frederick Johnson was no ordinary dad. A passionate advocate for justice, he had built a reputation handling high-profile discrimination cases. Corporate suits and high-stakes negotiations were his battlefield. He was proud of his daughter's achievements, seeing in her the same fervor for fairness and equality that he'd carried his whole career. But Emma's arena was technology, a realm Frederick admired but didn't fully understand. Nevertheless, he supported her unconditionally. That evening, she and her father shared a simple takeout dinner, sushi for Emma, and stir-fried noodles for Frederick, while discussing Emma's flight details. "I want you to be safe, baby girl," Frederick said, scraping the last bits of noodles from his box. "And remember, no matter what, I'm always one phone call away." Emma smiled warmly. "I know, Dad. Thank you. But I'll be fine. It's just another flight, another conference, another pitch." Frederick nodded, but there was that paternal concern in his eyes. He had seen the world at its ugliest, had seen how prejudice could flare at the most unexpected moments. Emma, though prepared for anything, was about to face a confrontation neither of them could have ever predicted. Emma double-checked her documents, ID, boarding pass, hotel reservation, everything she needed. She was scheduled to fly in first class. A seat upgrade she'd treated herself to as a reward for all those sleepless nights coding and designing. She'd flown first class only a handful of times, mostly courtesy of her father's frequent flyer miles, or as a perk when she'd snagged a last-minute upgrade. This time she had paid for it herself, and it felt like a milestone. Her company was doing well enough that she could afford the luxury without guilt. If only she had known that this simple seat would trigger a clash that would test the depths of prejudice and prove just how powerful it is to stand up for one's dignity. That night, Emma fell asleep dreaming of a bright future, wholly unaware that her short flight across the country was about to become a battle for respect in the skies. Captain Connor Caldwell was not the typical face of outward racism, and that was the problem. Connor believed himself a professional beyond reproach, proudly claiming the mantra, "I don't see color, I see people." He'd said it often at dinner parties, in the Delta pilot's lounge, or whenever conversation veered toward racial issues. He sincerely believed he was open-minded, judging folks only by their manners, skills, or how they treated others. Yet, concealed behind that carefully curated self-image lurked biases that had grown in him unchecked since childhood. Connor's upbringing in a small Midwestern town had exposed him to a world where diversity existed primarily on television. Most of his neighbors looked like him: white, working class, devout. That environment shaped his worldview, embedding subtle stereotypes he'd never questioned. When he became a pilot, his first real taste of broader society came from traveling. He shook hands with people in Tokyo, drank beers with folks in Paris, but never got close enough to examine the prejudices lying dormant in his mind. He had maintained a certain distance, always hiding behind a veneer of professional courtesy. Years passed, and Connor climbed the ranks, eventually earning the coveted position of captain. He loved the power of controlling a Boeing 737, the sense of order, the crisp uniform, and the aura of respect that came with his stripes. But beneath his tidy exterior, frustration brewed. Recently, he'd lost out on a promotion to a younger pilot, someone he believed had only advanced quickly because the airline was trying to diversify their leadership. The corporate office had indeed been encouraging inclusion and diversity, but not at Connor's expense. However, in his mind, it had always been somebody else's fault. So when he saw young professionals of color thriving, a flash of resentment sometimes gripped him. That morning, Connor was assigned to flight 453 to Los Angeles. He left his apartment in Queens at 4:30 a.m., tugging his roller bag with a stale cup of coffee in hand. The crisp, pre-dawn air bit at his cheeks. Though it was a short flight, about 6 hours gate to gate, something about the day felt off. Connor tried to shrug away the ominous feeling. It was just an early morning, he told himself. Upon arriving at JFK, Connor went through the familiar routine: check in with the gate staff, greet the flight attendants, chat with the co-pilot about the flight plan. Connor's co-pilot for the day was Mark Nguyen, a relatively new hire with a stellar record. Mark's parents had immigrated from Vietnam decades earlier, and Mark had worked hard to become a commercial pilot. Connor liked Mark well enough, but still carried a faint competitive streak. "Morning, Captain," Mark greeted, adjusting his tie. "Morning, Mark," Connor replied, with a polite nod. "Let's hope for calm winds today." The approach into LAX can be tricky if the Santa Anas are blowing. They went on to do their pre-flight checks, verifying instruments, checking fuel, reviewing weather forecasts, and synchronizing the flight computers. Everything was standard. No red flags in the mechanical checks or the weather. If all went well, they'd be in La by mid-afternoon. As the clock neared boarding time, Connor wandered into the terminal to grab another coffee. He passed by the first-class lounge, momentarily glancing at the well-heeled travelers, inside some reading newspapers, some tapping away at laptops, others sipping complimentary drinks. He saw Emma Johnson sitting in a plush seat, typing on her tablet with a calm focus. She wore a tailored blazer, neatly pressed slacks, and a gold watch that glinted in the overhead light. For a second, Connor thought she looked out of place. It was a split-second impression, the kind that, if questioned, he wouldn't admit was shaped by her being a young black woman in first class. He shook the thought away. Still, a small seed of resentment planted itself in his mind. He remembered losing out on that promotion. A sense of unfairness welled up, unmoored from logic. He found himself wondering who Emma was, how she got the means to sit in first class. Had she earned it, or was it some diversity perk? He never would have voiced such a question aloud, believing he was above such petty judgments. But the question lingered like a stale odor. Shrugging it off, Connor continued to the coffee shop. He told himself to focus on flying. The plane didn't care who was sitting in first class or economy. Flying had one rule above all: safety and precision. Boarding began at 6:10 a.m. sharp. Emma arrived at the gate, scanned her boarding pass, and smiled politely at the gate agent who said, "Enjoy your flight, Miss Johnson." Emma had no reason to suspect the day would be anything but routine. She settled into her first-class seat, 2A, near the window. She loved the view of the aircraft's wing and the chance to catch glimpses of sunrise through the clouds. The flight attendants offered a pre-takeoff beverage. Emma asked for orange juice, hoping the vitamins would energize her. She noticed the man seated in 2B, an older gentleman in a business suit, eyeing her for a moment before offering a polite nod. Emma returned the gesture, used to the curious glances. Sometimes, older men were perplexed to see a young black woman dressed in business attire, traveling in first class. Over time, she'd grown accustomed to ignoring it. As the rest of the passengers filed in, Emma opened her tablet to review her presentation slides. She meticulously checked bullet points, transitions, and the color scheme. This meeting in La was going to be the turning point for her startup. She could feel it. One final run-through, she told herself, to calm the nerves. In the cockpit, Connor glanced at the passenger manifest. It showed a near-full flight, with only a few seats open in the main cabin. In first class, there were a few upgrades, including Emma Johnson. Something about her name stuck in his mind. He remembered her face from the lounge. Then, without intending to, he discovered her seat assignment, 2A. He shook off an odd sense of irritation. He chided himself, stop thinking about her, focus. Yet he couldn't. A cluster of irrational thoughts swirled, a flicker of memory. The new pilot who had soared past him for a promotion was a black woman from Atlanta, another Emma, or maybe Elise. He didn't remember her name, only how the airline made a show of championing women of color in aviation. He wondered if Emma in 2A was connected to that somehow. It made no rational sense, but biases rarely do. "Captain, we're ready to close the doors soon," the lead flight attendant said over the intercom. Connor took a breath. Understood. I'll make the announcement shortly. He donned his pilot hat and prepared to address the cabin. This was a routine he'd done countless times, but today it felt heavier. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Captain Connor Caldwell, and on behalf of Delta Airlines, I'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 453 non-stop service to Los Angeles International Airport. Our flight time today is approximately 6 hours. Please stow your carry-on luggage, fasten your seatbelts, and we'll be underway soon." Connor's voice boomed through the speakers. People were still standing in the aisle, shoving bags into overhead bins. Emma barely paid attention to the announcement. She was engrossed in her slides. Little did she know that voice would soon single her out in a way that defied logic and decency. With everyone nearly seated, the flight attendants locked the overhead bins. Mark, the co-pilot, was entering the final data into the flight management system. Everything was set for an on-time departure. Connor made a final scan of the passenger list. Out of nowhere, a compulsion tugged at him. He told himself it was about verifying the identity of the passengers. He claimed to the flight attendants that there was an irregularity he needed to check. So, without explanation, Connor left the cockpit and walked into the first-class cabin. Passengers were startled to see the captain strolling down the aisle moments before takeoff. Emma, eyes on her tablet, felt him loom beside her. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Emma asked, polite but puzzled. Connor didn't answer right away. He stared at Emma's features, something unreadable in his expression. Then he looked at her tablet, its cover embellished with her startup's logo. His thoughts scattered, but he forced his tone to remain official. "Ma'am, may I please see your boarding pass?" Emma blinked. She had already had it scanned at the gate, but she handed over the slip without protest. "Sure." Connor glanced at it. Everything was in order. Emma Johnson, 2A, first class, purchased fare. No freebies, no mismatched name. Connor felt a small surge of annoyance. He looked for any reason to question her. There was none. He returned the boarding pass. "Thank you," Emma said gently, glancing around at the curious stares from other first-class passengers. Connor lingered a moment longer, lips pressed together, then turned and walked back to the cockpit. Emma shrugged, assuming maybe it was a random check. Strange, but whatever, she thought. She returned to her tablet, unaware that the pilot's internal storm was only growing. From the cockpit, Connor radioed the gate agents. He began speaking in hushed tones that unsettled the staff. He cited a safety concern, claiming that one of the first-class passengers might pose a security risk. The gate agent on the other end of the line was surprised. They'd done thorough checks. Emma had no flagged record, no suspicious history. The gate agent politely pressed for details. Connor didn't have any details, only a vague rationale that Emma's presence made him uneasy. He cast it in the language of protocol. "I have reason to believe the passenger in 2A might be an unverified traveler." The gate agent, confused, asked if he wanted additional screening. Connor insisted Emma be removed and re-verified. The gate agent, though skeptical, complied, because a pilot's security concerns, however vague, usually take precedence. The flight attendant approached Emma with an uncomfortable expression. "Miss Johnson, I'm sorry, but the captain has requested you step off the aircraft for additional verification. We apologize for the inconvenience." Emma's heart pounded. She'd never experienced anything like this. "Additional verification?" she echoed. "I've already scanned my ID and boarding pass." I understand, ma'am. It's just standard procedure to follow the captain's request," the attendant said, eyes cast downward. "We'll re-check your boarding pass at the gate, and then you can come right back." The flight attendant hoped it would be that simple, even though she too sensed something very wrong. Embarrassed but resolved, Emma gathered her laptop bag. The older gentleman in 2B frowned, whispering, "That's odd. Good luck." Emma gave a half smile. She could feel the stares drilling into her back. She tried to maintain her composure, but anger simmered just beneath her cool exterior. She had done absolutely nothing wrong. At the jet bridge, the gate agent apologized profusely. "I'm so sorry, Miss Johnson. Let me verify your information." Emma presented her ID, credit card used for the ticket, and the original confirmation email. Everything matched perfectly. The gate agent scanned the boarding pass again. No issues. Emma waited, arms folded, as the agent called the pilot. "Captain, everything is in order. Miss Johnson's identity is verified. Shall I clear her to reboard?" A tense pause. Then Connor's voice crackled. "I'm refusing to take off with her on board." Shock paralyzed the gate agent. Emma froze. "Refusing to take off with me?" The words echoed in her mind, heavy as lead. The gate agent asked for clarification. "Captain, do you have a specific reason? Is there a security threat we need to be aware of?" Connor hedged. I'm not comfortable with her presence. I'm the captain, and I have final say on security matters. The gate agent glanced at Emma, who stood there, eyes wide with disbelief. Passengers began to whisper among themselves. One by one, they realized the flight was delayed because Emma was being singled out. Emma felt her cheeks burn. She was used to microaggressions, but never had she been accused of being a security risk, especially on such a flimsy basis. Finally, Emma found her voice. "This is unacceptable. I paid for my ticket. I have important business in Los Angeles. If he wants me off the plane, I want a valid explanation." The gate agent could do nothing but shrug helplessly. "I'm so sorry, Miss Johnson. The pilot has the authority. But let's see if we can straighten this out." A supervisor was called. More minutes ticked by. Passengers grew restless. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. Her father, Frederick, was calling. She stepped aside to pick up. "Hey, baby girl, what's going on? Are you in the air yet?" Frederick asked, voice bright with fatherly concern. Emma exhaled sharply, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Dad, the pilot is refusing to take off with me on board. He's claiming I'm a security risk." Silence on the other end. Then Frederick's voice turned grave. "What do you mean? That's ridiculous. Did they give a reason?" "No reason that makes sense," Emma replied, tears of anger pressing at the corners of her eyes. "I'm standing in the jet bridge with a gate agent and some supervisor. They say it's the captain's decision." Frederick's tone sharpened with every word. "Put me on speaker. Let me speak to the supervisor." Emma motioned to the gate agent, who, though sympathetic, complied. Frederick introduced himself, his voice steady but loaded. "My name is Frederick Johnson. I'm an attorney, and Miss Emma Johnson is my daughter. I'd like to know on what grounds your captain is refusing her flight." The supervisor cleared his throat, aware of the tension. "Sir, the pilot cited a security concern. However, all of Miss Johnson's documentation is in order. We've tried to clear it up, but the pilot is within his rights to refuse a passenger." Frederick didn't mince words. "This is blatant discrimination. I'm sure you realize the potential legal ramifications. If this pilot can't provide a legitimate reason, I'll escalate this matter immediately." The supervisor swallowed. He was well versed in the airline's policy. A captain could refuse a passenger only under genuine security concerns, or if the passenger was behaving disruptively. Emma was neither. Legal entanglements loomed. The airline did not need a scandal. With the flight already delayed, the situation was turning chaotic. A crowd had gathered, some passengers grumbling about missing connections. Others exchanged worried glances. A few quietly supported Emma, telling the staff it was obvious racial discrimination. People pulled out phones, ready to record. The supervisor tried to radio Connor again. "Captain, we've verified Miss Johnson's credentials. If there is no credible security threat, you need to let her board, or we'll have to document the refusal as an incident. This could have serious consequences." Connor's response was terse. "She makes me uncomfortable. I'll not fly with her. Either she finds another flight or I'm not taking off." The supervisor's face paled. Emma, overhearing, felt her temper flare. She was done. "This is outrageous, Dad. I'm going to see if there's another flight out, but this pilot is not getting away with this." Frederick's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Hold on, Emma. Before you switch flights, I'm contacting the airline's board. I know a couple of members personally. This will not stand." With that, Emma ended the call, anger and humiliation coursing through her. She locked eyes with the supervisor, who looked mortified. "I want him on record stating his reason. I'm not leaving quietly," she said. And so the standoff began, a standoff that was about to spiral far beyond any gate or cabin. Frederick Johnson had spent decades fighting for civil rights, leading class action suits against discriminatory lenders, battling for fair housing, and representing employees wrongfully terminated because of their race. He was no stranger to intimidation or bureaucratic runaround. When Emma explained the pilot's refusal, Frederick felt an old fury awaken within him, the same fury that had driven him to the front lines of countless legal battles. He knew precisely who to contact. Years ago, Frederick had crossed paths with Jacqueline Roberts, a senior board member at Delta Airlines, during a corporate discrimination lawsuit. Though they had been on opposite sides initially, mutual respect had formed. After that case, the two had remained in loose contact, exchanging updates on civil rights matters. He also had a passing acquaintance with John Maxwell, another board member, who'd once expressed admiration for Frederick's legal expertise. Frederick wasted no time. He scrolled through his phone until he found Jacqueline's contact. After a few rings, she picked up, sounding slightly startled. "Frederick, it's been ages. Is everything all right?" Frederick launched into a measured but impassioned explanation, detailing Emma's predicament at JFK. He relayed how the pilot had singled her out, demanded her removal, and offered no valid explanation. Jacqueline listened quietly, alarm evident in her breaths. "My daughter has done nothing wrong," Frederick insisted. "She's simply traveling on a legitimate ticket in first class. This is a blatant violation of her civil rights. I'm asking you, as a board member, to intervene immediately." Jacqueline assured him she'd make some calls. Next, Frederick called John Maxwell, who responded with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Maxwell promised to escalate the issue to Delta's legal team and the executives overseeing flight operations. Meanwhile, Emma stood in the jet bridge with the supervisor. A crowd of curious onlookers had formed. Some had begun filming, capturing Emma's calm but firm stance. She refused to let them keep her from traveling, but she also refused to slip away in humiliation without making a statement. "Folks, we're sorry for the delay," the supervisor announced to the other passengers. "We're working to resolve a situation." Some nodded in understanding. Others scowled at Emma, muttering about missed connections. Emma did her best to ignore them, focusing on an inward mantra: "I deserve to be here. I belong here." At that moment, Emma's phone rang. It was Frederick again. "Emma, I've spoken to 2 board members who are outraged. They're contacting the airline's executives immediately. Hold tight. You have every right to that seat." Relief washed over Emma, tempered by the humiliation still roiling in her stomach. "Thanks, Dad. I'm so sorry this is happening. I just wanted to make my meeting." Frederick's voice softened. "Don't apologize. This is not your fault. Stay calm, okay? This pilot is out of line. Justice will be served." Just then, the supervisor's phone pinged. He glanced at it, then turned to Emma, wide-eyed. "Miss Johnson, the airline's corporate office is instructing us to resolve this immediately. They want you on this flight, and they're speaking to the captain now." A glimmer of hope sparked in Emma. She clutched her laptop bag, thinking maybe the ordeal would end and she could still make her conference on time. But any optimism dissolved when she heard the captain's next move. From inside the cockpit, Connor felt pressure mounting. The gate agent had relayed that corporate was demanding Emma be allowed to re-board. Connor's co-pilot, Mark Nguyen, had overheard enough to sense that something was very wrong. "Captain," Mark ventured cautiously, "this is going to blow up. If there's really no security threat, we should just let her back on. Our jobs depend on compliance with airline policy." Connor's face was a storm cloud. His pride was pinned to this refusal. Admitting a mistake now would shatter his fragile sense of authority. He had no rational explanation, just an irrational discomfort that he refused to question. Worse, he felt attacked, as if Emma and corporate were ganging up on him. "I'm the captain," Connor snapped. "I decide who flies. If corporate wants me to risk the safety of this plane for political correctness, I won't do it. I'll step down from this flight." Mark's eyes widened. "Captain, are you sure you want to go that far? Resign from the flight over a verified passenger?" Connor bristled, feeling cornered. "I don't trust her. End of story. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but was cut off as the lead flight attendant knocked on the cockpit door. "Captain, corporate is on the line. They're demanding an explanation." Connor snatched the phone. For several minutes he went back and forth with a manager from corporate flight operations. The manager pressed for specifics. Connor gave none, reverting to statements like, "I have the final say and I will not fly this passenger." The manager emphasized that refusing Emma was a violation of policy unless Connor had undisputable proof of a threat. Connor couldn't produce any. In a final act of defiance, Connor declared, "I'm stepping away from this flight. If you want to override me, find another pilot." Stunned silence followed. The corporate manager told him to stand by. The flight was already delayed almost 40 minutes. Delta needed this plane in LAX on schedule, or they'd risk a cascading effect of cancellations. The manager gave Connor one last chance to retract. Connor refused. Mark looked on, disbelieving, as Connor hung up the phone. "Captain, this is going to have serious repercussions." Connor took a deep breath. "I'd rather that than be forced to fly with someone I don't trust." Mark closed his eyes, feeling a surge of dread for his own career. He had a mortgage, student loans, a family. He couldn't let Connor's personal prejudice sabotage everything. He mustered his courage. "Captain, with all due respect, I think you need to reconsider. You have no grounds. This is racism. You're going to lose your job over this." Connor's gaze turned icy. "Watch your mouth, Mark, or you can join me in the unemployment line." Mark's heart pounded. He'd never confronted a superior so directly, but he couldn't remain silent while the pilot's prejudice ran rampant. He said nothing further, but his disgust was palpable. Minutes later, a call came. The chief pilot at JFK had been informed of the situation. She marched down to the gate, flanked by a small entourage of airline officials. With Emma, the supervisor, and a crowd of stunned passengers looking on, she stormed into the cockpit. From the jet bridge, Emma watched as the official demanded Connor step out for a private talk. Corporate employees quickly blocked the view of onlookers, but Emma could see the chief pilot's stern expression, her hands clenched into fists. After a heated exchange that lasted a few tense minutes, Connor emerged, face red. He retrieved his flight bag, uniform cap clutched under his arm, and brushed past Emma without a word. The chief pilot announced to everyone, "Captain Caldwell has been relieved of duty on this flight." A wave of shocked murmurs passed through the cabin and gate area. Emma felt equal parts relief and disbelief. She glanced at the departing pilot, who stared straight ahead, refusing to meet her gaze. "Thank you," Emma whispered to the chief pilot, who nodded curtly and ordered the staff to prepare for a swift departure, with a replacement. Captain Mark Nguyen would move to the captain's seat, with another pilot on standby as co-pilot. This shuffle would take time, but Emma would get to La as planned, albeit delayed. Passengers clapped in relief, though not all. Some, ignorant of the reason, were just glad to finally depart. Others recognized Emma as the woman singled out, whispering that the pilot must have been racist to cause such a scene. Emma sat down in a waiting area chair, letting out a shaky breath. She pulled out her phone and called Frederick. "Dad, the pilot just stormed off. They're replacing him." Frederick let out a quiet laugh of relief. "Good. Let me speak with Jacqueline." "This isn't over, Emma. We want accountability. But first, go to your conference. Show them what you can do. We'll handle the fallout together." An hour later, Emma was finally in her first-class seat, 2A, buckled up for departure. Mark, newly promoted to acting captain for the flight, apologized over the intercom for the delay, stating only that there had been a crew scheduling change. Emma could still sense tension in the cabin, but she focused on her laptop, determined not to let the incident rattle her too deeply. She was a professional, and she would handle her business in Los Angeles. Once airborne, Emma tried to relax. She sipped water, gazed out the window at the expansive blue sky. Eventually, she nodded off, exhaustion and emotional stress taking their toll. When the plane touched down in LAX, Emma felt a wave of gratitude. Despite the fiasco, she was only a couple of hours late. She still had time to make her afternoon meeting if she hurried. The lead flight attendant quietly approached, offering Emma a $500 voucher and a heartfelt apology. "I'm so sorry, Miss Johnson. We appreciate your patience." Emma accepted the gesture, though no sum could fully compensate for the humiliation. Still, she needed to get to her meeting. She thanked the attendant, picked up her bag, and exited the aircraft. She saw some passengers eyeing her with sympathy. A few gave encouraging nods. She pressed forward, determination rekindled. She navigated through LAX, got a taxi, and sped off to her hotel, where she had just enough time to freshen up and head to her conference. Her father kept texting, updating her on the airline's responses. They were investigating the pilot's behavior. "Keep your head high," Frederick wrote. "I love you." Meanwhile, across the country, Connor Caldwell slunk into his Queens apartment, a toxic blend of anger and fear brewing. He'd essentially stormed off a flight, defying corporate orders. The news was sure to spread like wildfire within Delta's ranks. He dreaded checking his voicemail or email. When he finally did, as predicted, messages poured in. A curt voicemail from a flight operations manager demanded an immediate explanation. A union representative had also left a message, urging Connor to remain silent until the union could assign a lawyer. Connor felt cornered. He'd acted in the heat of his biases, and now the consequences were descending like a tidal wave. A breaking point came when he turned on the local news. A segment teased, "Coming up, a Delta pilot removed himself from a flight after allegedly refusing to fly with a black passenger. Could it be the latest incident of racial discrimination in the skies?" Connor's stomach churned. He switched channels, hoping for relief, only to find chatter on social media. Twitter was ablaze with hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #racism in the skies. Some posts even mentioned his name, gleaned from staff who had leaked the story. Connor realized the severity of what he'd done, but he refused to see it as racism. He convinced himself Emma must have done something suspicious. She had to, he thought, clinging to a fantasy that would justify his actions. He paced his living room, ignoring calls from friends and colleagues. In less than a day, he'd gone from a respected pilot to a pariah. What he didn't know was that Frederick Johnson was already taking steps to ensure Connor would be held accountable in every possible way. Word spread quickly through Delta's headquarters in Atlanta. The story had reached national news channels by the end of the day, and public outcry surged on social media. Delta's communications team scrambled to craft statements, while the legal department braced for potential lawsuits. Jacqueline Roberts, the board member Frederick had called, demanded an internal investigation. She collaborated with John Maxwell and other executives, insisting that the airline publicly condemn discrimination and address the pilot's conduct. They all knew Emma's father was not just a concerned parent, he was a formidable civil rights attorney with a track record of winning high-profile cases. Within 48 hours, Emma had completed her meetings in Los Angeles with moderate success, though the incident weighed heavily on her mind. Investors, aware of the fiasco, sympathized and admired her composure under pressure. Some even expressed increased interest in her startup, seeing her as a resilient figure who refused to be bullied. Emma's project garnered attention, boosting her confidence. Yet, as night fell, the entire ordeal swirled in her thoughts. She'd never forget the moment she was singled out, forced off a plane, and treated like a threat for no reason other than her skin color. On the third day, Emma and Frederick participated in a phone conference with Delta's senior legal counsel. They listened as the counsel apologized profusely for the pilot's behavior. Frederick arms folded, pressed for more than apologies. He wanted a clear plan of accountability and anti-discrimination reforms. Emma spoke softly but firmly, sharing how humiliated she felt. The council assured them the investigation would be thorough and that Connor Caldwell had been placed on indefinite administrative leave. After the call, Frederick turned to Emma. "You did well. They're feeling the heat. Don't be surprised if they offer a settlement." Emma sighed. "I don't want just money, Dad. I want to make sure they enforce real change. There are too many stories of black passengers being singled out for nonsense reasons. If this helps prevent the next person from experiencing that, it'll be worth it." Frederick nodded. "Of course. We'll see how it plays out. Just don't let them sweep it under the rug." Meanwhile, Connor sat in a stark conference room at Delta's local office. A union lawyer at his side, he faced a panel of airline officials demanding answers. Connor insisted he had reasons to believe Emma posed a threat, but could provide no evidence. The officials questioned him point by point. Why hadn't he simply talked to Emma? Why had he refused to listen when gate agents verified her credentials? Why had he escalated the situation, leading to a substantial operational disruption? Connor mumbled vague responses. He had a gut feeling. Emma looked suspicious. Her behavior was questionable. The panel found his excuses baseless and contradictory. By the end of the interrogation, it was clear that Connor was at fault. The airline suspended him pending final review, with termination likely. Connor left the meeting in a haze of dread. His once stellar career was in tatters, and the man who prided himself on control realized he had none. Outside the office, reporters lingered, hurling questions. "Captain Caldwell, is it true you refused to fly with a passenger just because she's black? Do you have anything to say to Emma Johnson?" Cameras flashed. Connor marched past them, jaw clenched, refusing to speak. Frederick Johnson was not just a father, he was an advocate at heart. While Emma returned to New York, Frederick launched a comprehensive approach using media, legal channels, and direct corporate negotiations to highlight the pilot's wrongdoing. In press interviews, Frederick stated calmly but pointedly that this was about more than one flight. It was a reflection of how easily bias could ruin someone's travel experience and sense of dignity. Soon, Emma's story dominated headlines. Delta pilot refuses to fly with black woman sparks corporate shakeup. Civil rights groups demanded changes in airline policies. Journalists dug into Connor Caldwell's background, uncovering older complaints about his attitude toward certain passengers and staff. Though not enough to constitute a clear pattern, it painted a picture of a man with simmering biases. The airline tried to contain the damage, emphasizing they had zero tolerance for discrimination. They spoke of new training programs and thorough investigations. But Frederick wanted specifics. He pushed for mandatory bias training, not just for flight crews, but for management. He requested new protocols for verifying allegations against passengers before forcing them off planes. He also pressed for Emma to receive a formal, public apology. As the storm roiled, Emma tried to return to her normal routine, meeting with potential partners and refining her software. But her inbox overflowed with interview requests and messages of both support and animosity. Friends praised her courage. Strangers shared their own stories of discrimination in the sky. Some critics accused her of playing the race card. Emma felt her anxiety spike whenever she saw hateful comments, but she remembered her father's words, "Don't let them define you." At a press conference, Frederick and Emma stood side by side. Under bright lights, cameras rolling, Emma recounted her story in a calm, clear voice. "I love to travel. I pay for my tickets like everyone else. On that day, the pilot refused to accept my presence on his plane without any justification. That's not just humiliating, it's a violation of my rights. No one should ever have to prove their legitimacy simply because of prejudice." A wave of applause broke out. Frederick stepped up, adding, "This is why we're calling for substantive changes. We want to ensure no other passenger endures this kind of harassment. We're thankful that Delta's leadership is listening, but words alone are not enough. Accountability must follow." Back at his apartment, Connor watched snippets of the press conference on TV, a bitter taste in his mouth. He felt scapegoated, unfairly labeled a racist, though he couldn't deny that his actions had no foundation except his own biases. A swirl of regrets, anger, and defiance kept him awake at night. Legal counsel told him that Emma and Frederick might pursue a civil lawsuit. Connor dreaded the idea of a drawn-out legal battle, but he also feared losing everything if he accepted guilt. He snapped off the television, burying his face in his hands. How had it come to this? He was raised to be courteous and respectful, he told himself. Was he truly racist, or had a momentary lapse ruined his life? The swirling confusion offered no solace. His phone vibrated again, another call from a reporter. He tossed it aside. But the calls wouldn't stop, and neither would the repercussions. Karma, as they say, was coming for Connor Caldwell in ways he never saw coming. 2 weeks later, Emma received an unexpected email from an investor she had pitched in Los Angeles. Not only was the investor impressed by her software, but they also admired her poise amidst the discrimination scandal. The email read, "We believe in your solution and your character. Let's talk terms." Emma's heart soared. This was the break she'd been working for. If the deal went through, her startup would secure enough funding to expand and hire more developers. She called her father, voice trembling with excitement. "Dad, I think this is it. They want to finalize an investment. That's wonderful, Emma. You deserve it. Let's make sure your legal bases are covered." Frederick's paternal pride radiated through the phone. Across town, Connor's life careened in the opposite direction. On a drizzly morning, he received formal notice from Delta. He was terminated, effective immediately. The pilots' union had tried to negotiate a lesser punishment, maybe a suspension or forced retirement, but the airline decided to make an example of him. Public sentiment was too strong, and the evidence was too damning. Connor felt numb, though a flicker of anger still clung to him. With no job, no stable income, and a tarnished reputation, he stared at the letter in disbelief. He had poured years into building a career in aviation, countless hours of flight training, simulator tests, medical exams, early mornings, late nights. Now it was all gone. In a final blow, some of his pilot friends distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Connor felt alone, isolated. He tried to cling to the notion that Emma had orchestrated it all, but deep down, he knew the truth was simpler. He had acted from a place of prejudice, and the consequences were his alone. Unable to pay rent, Connor was forced to move out of his expensive Queens apartment. He ended up crashing with a cousin in a small town in upstate New York. The local news had reached there too, though in smaller circles. He found it impossible to escape the story. Pilot grounded for racism. He had trouble even walking around town without feeling paranoid, as though people were whispering behind his back. Meanwhile, Emma's star rose. She negotiated a lucrative deal for her software, ensuring she retained majority ownership. Her business soared, allowing her to hire a diverse team of bright programmers. She expanded operations to the West Coast, setting up a satellite office in Los Angeles. Every day she woke up with gratitude, remembering the humiliations she once faced and forging them into fuel for her ambitions. Eventually, Emma and her father decided to settle with Delta out of court. The terms included a public apology directed at Emma, a hefty compensation package, and a comprehensive plan to implement improved anti-discrimination training for airline staff. Emma donated a portion of her settlement to a scholarship fund for young women of color in STEM, determined to sow her success back into the community. For Connor, life's cruel turn was not done. One day, he found out he'd been blacklisted by major airlines, all of which had flagged his record. The Federal Aviation Administration was reviewing his pilot's license. Even smaller charter companies were wary. Desperate for work, he applied to a cargo airline overseas, but word had traveled. They politely turned him down. His final attempt came when he reached out to Emma directly, writing a long, rambling email. "I'm sorry," it began. "I never meant to hurt anyone, but I was under a lot of stress." He asked for Emma's forgiveness, hinting that perhaps she could retract her statements or help him get reinstated. Emma read the email with a heavy heart. Part of her felt pity for him. Another part remembered the humiliation he'd caused. She showed the email to her father. "He wants my help now," she murmured. Frederick frowned. "That's a choice only you can make. But just remember what he put you through, and also think about what message your response sends." After a day of contemplation, Emma penned a succinct reply. "I acknowledge your apology. I hope you reflect and learn from this experience. I cannot help you with your employment issue. The consequences of your actions are your own." She hit send, feeling a sense of closure wash over her. Connor never replied. He read Emma's words, shoulders slumping with defeat. The final door had closed. Karma had arrived full circle, delivering its lesson in harsh clarity. As we reflect on Emma's story, we see how prejudice can linger in even the most unlikely corners of our world, sometimes hidden beneath professional titles and polished uniforms. Yet we also witness the power of resilience. Emma stood her ground, harnessed her father's support, and ensured that justice and real change would take flight. By sharing her experience, she not only won back her dignity, but opened doors for others who might face similar discrimination. If you found her story compelling and inspiring, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps shine a light on stories of injustice and triumph, encouraging more people to speak up and demand respect. Together, we can help build a future where no one has to fight for a seat they've already rightfully earned. So hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and let's keep these vital conversations going.